So welcome back, everybody. We continue in the 45th chapter, which we began last class. As you recall, we're holding on page 128, just almost a half of the page. This is what the pasuk says. Again, it's a chapter we began. This the last class, Perik Mem Hey, where Alter Rebbe begins an additional straight way, to translate it exactly, for a Yid to occupy himself in Teda Mitzvahs Lishman through extracting the character of Yaakov Avinu, which is Midav Rachmanis. Again, we spoke about this. You can see the previous classes we mentioned at the time and again, namely for the newcomers. You can see this previous class as well as all the previous classes from the very beginning of Tanya, for that matter, on the TanyaOnline.com website. The advantage that the text has a separate scroll bar. It's easy to follow. Again, this very past class, this past class on this chapter and all the previous classes set up in the same manner, and again, easy access to all of them. It's literally a click away. So we won't go into this Perik Mem Hey, the very beginning, as Alter Rebbe explains. Again, the Avraham, Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, a number of places, but he mentioned also perhaps that it's related to the previous chapter. But again, the Midah of Yaakov being the Midah of Tiferes, corresponding to Rachmanis, Midah of Rachamim, Midah of mercy, compassion. And he goes into the entire picture of Yidus and Hashem Beguf, and that a person is able to yank himself away from anything which is not aligned with the spirit of Teda Mitzvahs and connect himself to the spirit of Teda Mitzvahs via arousing the Rachmanis on his neshama. In other words, he stands back and he realizes the great Rachmanis by definition of what the whole image is all about. A neshama, part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, part and parcel of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, part of the Ein Sof, as the Alter Rebbe writes, part of the Memala Kolam and Sevu Kolam and Kula Kamei Kolach Machashiv, every dimension of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because it is part of the entire HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's a Chelik of the Kamimal. And that Yorda Ploim, let's say this word over here in the Kodetera, I believe in this week's parsha, Alter Rebbe used the terminology Yorda Ploim. It plummeted into a body which is Mashcha de Chavyo, skin of the snake, as we mentioned last week, the meaning of it, into a world which is Rochik Me'er Pnei Melech, a world which is very distant from the face, the countenance, overt countenance of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, world which is Mailam Master, conceals over the very reality of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is Mahava Machai Mekayim. It's as it's denying it. In other words, it's the true reality which continues to vitalize this very world, which is denying its own reality. And the Lashon of he brings over here that it's Tachlis HaKlipas HaElam Hazah. This world is a Tachlis HaKlipas HaGasus, which is the ultimate Krask Klipas. This is Ein Tachan Shlamate Menu. So you can't think of anything so diametrically opposite than Neshama, part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, than Elam Hazah, and again within the Guf, the body, which is Mashcha de Chavyo. There's Lashon brought in a number of places. Migra Ramah Bira Mikta, from the highest of mountain to the lowest of valleys. What a great Rachmanis it is on the Neshama. And Befrat, particularly when the person, Alter Rebbe continues, that if that wasn't enough, what the person on his own contributed to this Helam V'Hester, to this concealment of this reality of HaKadosh Baruch Hu via all his speech, his action, his machshavas, his thought, that a person reminds himself and has, with true accountability and with true cheshbon nefesh of everything that he again contributed to this Helam V'Hester, this concealment. As Alter Rebbe writes, when he calculates all his actions, speech, and thoughts from the day that he came into the arena, from the day one. And Alter Rebbe again points out, if we mentioned last week, if you recall, Alter Rebbe says, even though this is a world of Maisa, but Machshava, because it's constantly flowing and it's so much closer to the Nefesh, it's more like a Nafshis Dikelavush, when that's impure, the Gullus becomes yet much deeper, as Alter Rebbe's Lashon Berihite Mecha, the flow of the Meach. That's where the Melech, the king, is incarcerated b'rahotim, in the flow of the Meach, in the impure spirit, Rahman al-Tzlan, which does and can exist, Rahman al-Tzlan. And again, as Alter Rebbe writes, and he touched the pasuk, "V'yoshev al Hashem v'yirachameyu," his return to HaKadosh Baruch Hu is because v'yirachameyu, because of the arousal of the Rachamim Rabim, Al Shem Hashem, which is Sheikhin Yitonu, which dwells within us, and so on. As the Alter Rebbe concludes, Sheikhin Yitonu b'teich tumasam, within their impurity. What a great Rachmanis is on this, on the Elokus, on the Melech, which is the Eibishter, which is which is ultimately the Neshama being a spark of that Elokus and being part of that Elokus even more, which is invested in this reality, and hence the great Rachmanis. There, the Alter Rebbe in today we begin today, and we left off. The Alter Rebbe continues. This is Zeu Shomer HaKosav. This is what the pasuk says. Vayishak Yaakov l'Rachel. Vayises Koil Vayev Yaakov kissed Rachel, and he elevated his voice and he cried. So that understandably, that there's the Pirush HaPashut, the simple meaning. The Yaakov came so vulnerable to meet his future wife, and ultimately wives, and establishing his new home and so on. As a simple meaning, he was stripped away from any type of money he had in order to come like a mensch. That was one of the things which, again, by Yef, this is the simple. It says a number of places he saw Rachel, he had that nevuah that he's not going to be interred with her, and that it causes by Yef, and that he cried at the time. I mean, again, there's a simple pirush of this. Vayishak Yaakov l'Rachel v'yiskel Koil Vayev. Baal HaTorah puts it in this very context, what Rachel represents, what Yaakov Avinu represents, and what this pasuk means, and what Yaakov was trying to accomplish with that cry, with that Vayishak Yaakov l'Rachel v'yiskel Koil Vayev, with the elevation of his voice, Vayev crying. He says, why so? Because Rachel Knesset Yisrael Mikir Kol Neshamas. Rachel represents the ingathering of Yidden, Knesset Moshe Kainis, the source of the Neshamas. And the question right away begins, really, Malchus? We know that Rachel is Rachel and Leah are Malchus, two dimensions. Malchus, Leah is Machshava, Rachel is Dibur, mentioned a number of places in Kabbalah and Chassidus and so on. But Malchus, why would we attribute Malchus to the Mikir Kol Neshamas? Isn't Mikir Kol Neshamas Chochmei La, the supreme Chochmei of Kodesh Baruch Hu? Himself writes it in the second chapter of Tanya. And generally, when we think about Malchus, it's more that Malchus Chamalchus Kol Olamim, the source of Eilamis, which Alter Rebbe writes in Shari Yechiv Emunah, that pre-Malchus there doesn't exist any dynamic of Eilamis, even a lofty, supreme world which is sensitive to the divine is also doesn't exist pre-Malchus. Again, you can see in Shari Yechiv Emunah, when Malchus begins that whole the introducing the whole idea of allowing, and not only allowing Eilamis to exist, as the Alter Rebbe explains there, what Malchus synonymous with Shem Adna, Aden Kol Haaretz, it becomes the source of all Eilamis, like it says in the pasuk, Malchus Malchus Kol Eilamim. It becomes the source of all Eilamis, which means apparently when we think about Malchus, is this creating force and creating energy which would create Eilamis. What's the connection to Shamas Yisrael, which are the Pnimius of Elokus, not the Malchus which is ultimately associated and creates and is the source of Eilamis. Why would we say Mikir Kol Neshamas again? Especially we know that Mikir Kol Neshamas is Chochmei Lov Atzilus, but this is the terminology of Knesset Yisrael. The whole idea of Malchus, not to get into it, Malchus kind of establishes in structure the entire message of Elam Atzilus. It's the Chochmei Lo, which is the midah with the neshama, the source of all the neshamas, where the neshama comes from, the supreme Chochmah of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And every midah of Elam Atzilus carries another message. And then eventually there's the message to be a creator of Eilamis, and ultimately the Malchusei Umemshalte, in other words, the Eibishter's dominance and the Eibishter's reign should be Bakel Mashallah, should ultimately reign and dominate over everything, meaning to say HaKadosh Baruch Hu's presence. There should be a world. In other words, this is synonymous with the entire message. Why HaKadosh Baruch Hu created everything. Nisav HaKadosh Baruch Hu Lis Leitir B'Tachtenim, which we brought this Medrash Tanchuma multiple times. HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted a dwelling place in this world, so He creates Eilamis, and in that Eilam, He wants a Dira, He wants a dwelling place, meaning to say He wants to have His Malchus, Memshala, ultimately on every nikuda of Olam in every single level, to this even in Olam Hazeh Agashmi V'Chumri, into the very physical world, and more so this becomes the ultimate purpose. Dafka b'tachteinu, dafka in this world, v'yeda kol pol ki ata piyalte, v'yavin kol yitzur ki ata yitzarte. The whole world should be sensitive to the divine and ultimately appreciate the malchus and memshala of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, etc., etc. So there's a message as well. In other words, because that's in the end of the day, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the objective of HaKadosh Baruch Hu moving forward, with even creating Elam Atzilus and so on. We spoke about this many times. So when we say Malchus Mekir Kol HaNeshamas, it's not that that's the ultimate source of the Neshama. The ultimate source of the Neshama is a Chochmah, which again, the whole difference of Malchus and Chochmah is not just the difference of 9 Svidis. Malchus, prior to Malchus, everything prior to Malchus is part of the Ein Sof dynamics, even within Atzilus, from that area, and it couldn't be any Elam is creation of any Elams. Like the Rebbe explains it so clear that the whole idea of Zman U'Makim, time, place, and other words, the setup for Elam begins in Malchus. Chochmah Ilah within Atzilus itself is the deepest and the highest places. Within Atzilus, or the highest point in Atzilus. Chachma, it's totally Elokus, so it connects with the Ein Sof, and higher than Atzilus, and so on. That's where the Neshama comes from. But to say so, but it's not a contradiction, because that's the terminology of Knesset Yisrael, where it gathers. In other words, where the Malchus, in the end of the day, sets up the position of everything which we eventually need to go forward. If it's the Koyach, the Chitzeni is the external dimension, or say external dynamics of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which will ultimately become this source of Oilamis, Malchus Chomalchus Olamim, the setup of the Neshama, which ultimately is supposed to carries that important mandate in order to be megala lakus, to reveal godliness and ultimately establish this dira b'tachteinim, to establish this world as being an abode for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, a home for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, through its limud Torah, learning Torah and doing mitzvahs, and elevating the entire world towards in the spirit of a lakus. In revealing and godliness, to the extent one day of Ayin Bi Ayin Yiru, that the Elokus should be evident in Elam Hazeh. This is the Neshama which ultimately carries that important mandate. So Atzilus, every dimension in Atzilus carries another message, but it's all about looking with more of a broader look of what Atzilus is an intermediary between the Elamis of Ein Sof and the inferior Elamis, in order that the process should actually begin. The entire process should actually begin. So Malchus is where everything is set up. There's the Pnimis of Malchus, which is related to the Pnimis of Elokus, to the deeper inner dimensions of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, starting from the Chochmah Ilah, which that's the true Mekir of all the Neshamas. But where does it stand? As Knesset Yisrael. Knesset is that it stands in its position, and then everything's set up, the energy of Chochmah and everything else which would ultimately bring structure to that neshama, that it can go forward to do its avodah, is in Malchus Ve'atzilus. Then there's the Chitzenis of Malchus Ve'atzilus, which ultimately would create Elamis. Till Elam Hazeh, where the neshama is ultimately sent to implement, to actualize its important mandate. So it's not a contradiction when we say that the source of the neshama is Chochmah Ilah. It's a lukus, but where does it gain structure and position? Is in Malchus Ve'atzilus. Again, it's so much more to speak about it, but this is why Rachel is Malchus Ve'atzilus, but this is it becomes the Knesset Yisrael Mekir Kol HaNeshamas. Yaakov b'midasei Elyono, Yaakov in his supreme midah, he represents the supreme midah of Rachmanis, Rachamim of Atzilus, as we know. So again, Avraham is Chesed, Yitzchak is Gvura, Yaakov is Rachamim, which is really part of more the Atzilus energy as opposed to the Malchus, which again becomes the source of the next point, which again the Chitzenis of Malchus, which would be the creating energy of Bria, Yitzira, Asir, and so on, and the structure of the neshama. This is deeper yet. This is the spirit of Atzilus, as we mentioned so many times. Atzilus is the world which hosts and houses the Ein Sof. So Yaakov represents this midah of Rachmim of Atzilus itself, looking and focusing on Rachel, which is the neshama, Knesset Yisrael, the source of the neshama. So he's Me'er Rachmi Rab Mallah. Right away sees the great Rachmanis of this neshama. This is the neshama which ultimately plummets to this physical world, in a guf gashmi, in elam hazeh, and again on top of that, ma'aseh dibur machshav and so on, and he feels the great Rachmanis on the neshama, and namely takes the step with that character of Rachmanis in order to make a difference or the difference, to secure that neshama, to redeem that neshama, to bring redemption to the neshama, as he's going to continue through the Vayisas Kelev Vayefk. He wants to accomplish and to, in the neshama, to elevate the neshama, to be able to unite with its own source, which is the Ein Sof Baruch Hu, the infinite light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, blessed be He. How does he? So this is what the Alter Rebbe explains. Yaakov Roch, so Yaakov b'midas Elyono, which is midas Rachmim Shabbatzilus Omer Rachim Rab Malach. We made a brach already. To which is arouses the midas Rachmanis Aleha on the source of Neshamas Yisrael. Vayisas Keil L'Maylo L'Mkeira Rachmim L'Yin V'Nikra V'Rachmim L'Mkeira. The pasuk continues, and that he arouses, he elevates his voice, and he's crying. What's the point of elevating his voice? Yaakov feels that his own Rachmanis is insufficient in order to redeem that neshama. And the reason is that even though the midas of Atzilus, as Atzilus as a whole hosts and houses the Ein Sof, as a Lashon in a number of places in Chassidus, mentioned last week the Maimer of the Frierdiker Rebbe, Atzilus is Bichlal Ha'olam is Ein Sof. It's a world, part of the Ein Sof experience, if you will, but nonetheless, because it's Atzilus still has structure. It's called Olam, and by definition, Olam is Meloshin Helam Behester. The Gemara says, we spoke about this many times, and that's why Atzilus can an interface between the Ein Sof and the lower Olam is, because on one hand it carries the energy of the Ein Sof. Conversely, it's a Eilam, again, Eilam Lashon Helam Behester, and therefore the Midas of Atzilus justifiably carry the term Midah, measurement, because this is the point of the structure of Eilam Atzilus is an Eilam, hence every Midah is a Midah. So Yaakov, even the Midah of Rachmanis, of Yaakov, which is a Midah of Atzilus, which carries from a certain perspective and point of view an Ein Sof energy, but nonetheless, Yaakov feels that's not enough. I want to be successful with this Neshamas Yisrael, with plummeted so low, in order to emancipate, to elevate, to redeem that Neshama. He feels he has to go to a level which is higher than the Rachmanis, what he represents, which is the Midas HaRachim Datzilus, but go to the Ov HaRachim, to the source of Rachmanis, to the Rachmanis, the way it's sourced in the Ein Sof Baruch Hu, known as Rachamim Pshutim, Rachmanis without any measurement, a limitless Rachmanis, and Yaakov feels he has to go deeper yet within the Midah of Rachamim. And that's why Vayisas Kaili elevates his voice higher than Mikeira Rachamim Elyonim, to the source of Rachamim, which is again, it's called Rachamim within Arich, or even Rachamim within Atik. Again, these are terminologies which is categorizing the Ein Sof. Can't say it's a contradicting term. The paradox, no categorization to the Ein Sof, but it speaks about the Ein Sof. These are the midas, but again, there they don't stand with a midah and medida and akbala, any type of even subtle midah, because they represent. These are this energy. In this case, Rachmanis is all about the Rachmanis of the Ein Sof. It's all about expression of the Ein Sof, as opposed to an expression of a midah carrying the Ein Sof. But this is the Ein Sof itself, Rachmim Pshutim. He elevates himself to the Mikeira Rachmim Elyonim, to the source of the supreme Rachmim, which is called Ov HaRachamim, the father of Rachmanis, the Mikeira, the source of the Rachmanis. And by Yev, and he cries, and again, crying has the ability, or comes from, and it reaches a deeper level within the neshama, even within the person himself, on every different level. That's why people are touched by someone who's crying, and it extracts so much more if someone wants to accomplish something, because it touches a deeper part of the person who hears and appreciates this cry, because it comes mimamakim krasicha, so that's why crying brings out the emek of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And it's explained a number of places in Chassidus, the Ov HaRachamim. Ov HaRachamim is where the crying reaches, because it comes from the depth of the neshama, so it's able to extract from the depth of Elokus. And in this case, Yaakov Avinu cries because he wants to draw. This is where he's crying, to reach a deeper level than even the level of Racham, of that Tzilus, where what Yaakov Avinu represents. Like we find most of the time, default, people do not cry. There's normal interaction even, and its accomplishments and so on, especially a person is erlach, a person is straightforward, there's constant accomplishments, but when a person has to accomplish something deeper, and there is a cry, not he plans to cry, but there's a cry because it's coming from the depth of his nefesh, he accomplishes in the end by the person who is interacting with, or people who he's interacting with, those who can see his cry, they are also, when they say they're touched, because a certain depth within their nefesh of the people, for those who are listening and tuning into that cry, and as such, so much more is accomplished, because you're dealing with the deeper part of the nefesh, of the soul. Again, in this case, not even in the mashal, in this example which we're giving, not necessarily the godly soul, but in the soul of the person which you're trying to accomplish, or reach deeper yet within that soul of the parties which you're trying to accomplish, which comes from this demonstration how deep you're touched by this matter, and it aroused by you such a deep part of your nefesh, which led to a tear, and as such, it immediately touches a deeper part of the nefesh of another party, or other parties. And so too, Yaakov Avinu cries. Again, his crying is not a planned crying, but he feels the Rachmanis to such a degree that he wants to ma'ir, and to draw even a deeper level of Rachmanis within HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Eimek, the depth of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is the Ov HaRachamim, in order to accomplish this liberation of the neshama. And that's what Alter Rebbe writes. Vayev, he cries la'eru lahamshich misham rabim, to draw, to arouse, and to draw from there, from the level of HaRachamim, the Rachamim Pshutim of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. This much Rachmanis al kol neshamis, and all the neshamis on the Mekir Knesset Yisrael, and on the source, which is Knesset Yisrael, lahaloison migaluson, to elevate them from their galus, to emancipate them from their exile, uliyachdon, and to be allowed the neshama to reunite, and to liyachdon means unite them. In other words, by the neshama it's reunite, because it's a part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. To reunite them, biyichud ha'elyon in Tzav Baruch Hu, and in the supreme oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the infinite light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, blessed be He, that's where the neshama. So again, we know that that's the mandate of the neshama, come down to this world and is able to connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, dafka, to the core essence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, beyond any other achievement. Meaning to say, as Alter Rebbe writes in this 4th chapter of Tanya, that in explaining the Mishnah, in a place where this world, the Tshuva Ma'asim Tevim, is greater than Kol Chayil Mabah, because the entire experience of Chayil Mabah, Gan Eden, the highest levels of Gan Eden, not only the highest levels of Gan Eden before this Yid, but the entire structure of Gan Eden, where Moshe Rabbeinu is, Avraham Yitzchak Yaakov, it's only a zivah, it's only a small ray, as the Alter Rebbe brings in a number of places. L'Kutei Torah, we mentioned a number of places, the one little drop of the ocean in comparison to the entire ocean. Alter Rebbe says that's the whole Gan Eden, Elam Haba, is one ziva or one ray. It says ziva shchina, neni mi ziva shchina. The entire Eibishter is in Shnai Michzah Matzal Talis, in a Mishnah, in Halacha, in a mitzvah Yid does, even a number of places. Alter Rebbe writes the yichud from Torah, the oneness with the Kodesh Baruch Hu via Torah is even greater than the oneness of the Kodesh Baruch Hu via mitzvahs, but they both have in common that you unite with the oneness of the Kodesh Baruch Hu, completely become one with Hashem Himself, not only with one little drop, one ziv. So this is the objective of Yaakov Avinu, to yank the neshama from its galus and allow it to come into that space of emancipation, but not only emancipation to be yanked away from the Golus, but truly unite completely, to become one with the supreme oneness and unity with the infinite light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, blessed be He. And that's what Yaakov Avinu is accomplishing through his crying, because he's trying to draw from the Av HaRachamim in order to accomplish this. And then the Alter Rebbe is B'ez Hashem going to explain, B'ez Hashem hopefully the next class, what is the idea of Nishikin, the idea of Ayishak, and how is it relevant to this very message of this elevating the neshama and allowing it to become one in the supreme oneness, Yichud Ha'elyin of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, blessed be He. Have a wonderful night.